Chapter 40 of the Mutiny of the Elsinore. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Mutiny of the Elsinore by Jack London, Chapter 40. Another brutal sea superstition vindicated. From now on and for always, these imbeciles of ours will believe that Finns are Jonahs. We are west of the Diego de Ramirez rocks, and we are running west at a 12-knot clip with an easterly gale at our backs. And the carpenter is gone. His passing and the coming of the easterly wind were coincidental. It was yesterday morning, as he helped me to dress, that I was struck by the solemnity of Wada's face. He shook his head lugubriously as he broke the news. The carpenter was missing. The ship had been searched for him high and low. There just was no carpenter. "What does the steward think?" I asked. "What does Louis think? And Yatsuda?" "The sailors, they kill 'em carpenter sure," was the answer. "Very bad ship this. Very bad hearts. Just the same pig, just the same dog. All the time kill. All the time kill. By'm by everybody kill. You see." The old steward, at work in his pantry, grinned at me when I mentioned the matter. "They make fool with me, I fix 'em," he said vindictively. "Maybe they kill me, all right, but I kill some too." He threw back his coat, and I saw, strapped to the left side of his body, in a canvas sheath, so that the handle was ready to hand, a meat knife of the heavy sort that butchers hack with. He drew it forth, it was fully 2 feet long, and to demonstrate its razor edge, sliced a sheet of newspaper into many ribbons. "Ha!" he laughed sardonically. "I am Chink, monkey, damn fool, eh? No good, eh? All rotten damn to hell. I fix 'em, they make fool with me." And yet there is not the slightest evidence of foul play. Nobody knows what happened to the carpenter. There are no clues, no traces. The night was calm and snowy. No seas broke on board. Without doubt, the clumsy, big-footed, overgrown giant of a boy is overside and dead. The question is, did he go over of his own accord, or was he put over? At 8 o'clock Mr. Pike proceeded to interrogate the watches. He stood at the break of the poop, in the high place, leaning on the rail and gazing down at the crew assembled on the main deck beneath him. Man after man he questioned, and from each man came the one story. They knew no more about it than did we, or so they averred. "I suppose you'll be chargin' next that I hove that big lummox overboard with me own hands," Mulligan Jacobs snarled when he was questioned. "And mebbe I did, bein' that husky and rampagin' bull-like." The mate's face grew more forbidding and sour, but without comment he passed on to John Hackey, the San Francisco hoodlum. It was an unforgettable scene. The mate in the high place, the men, sullen and irresponsive, grouped below. A gentle snow drifted straight down through the windless air, while the Elsinore, with hollow thunder from her sails, rolled down on the quiet swells so that the ocean lapped the mouths of her scuppers with long-drawn, shuddering sucks and sobs. And all the men swayed in unison to the rolls, their hands in mittens, their feet in sack-wrapped sea boots, their faces worn and sick. And the 3 dreamers with the topaz eyes stood and swayed and dreamed together, incurious of setting and situation. And then it came, the hint of easterly air. The mate noted it first. I saw him start and turn his cheek to an almost imperceptible draught. Then I felt it. A minute longer he waited, until assured, when, the dead carpenter forgotten, he burst out with orders to the wheel and the crew. And the men jumped, though in their weakness the climb aloft was slow and toilsome. And when the gaskets were off the gallant sails, and the men on deck were hoisting yards and sheeting home, those aloft were loosing the royals. While this work went on, and while the yards were being braced around, the Elsinore, her bow pointing to the west, began moving through the water before the first fair wind in a month and a half. Slowly that light air fanned to a gentle breeze, while all the time the snow fell steadily. The barometer, down to 28.80, continued to fall, and the breeze continued to grow upon itself. Tom Spink, passing by me on the poop to lend a hand at the final finicky trimming of the mizzen yards, gave me a triumphant look. Superstition was vindicated. Events had proven him right. Fair wind had come with the going of the carpenter, which said warlock had incontestably taken with him overside his bag of wind tricks. Mr. Pike strode up and down the poop, rubbing his hands, which he was too disdainfully happy to mitten, chuckling and grinning to himself, glancing at the draw of every sail, stealing adoring looks astern into the gray snow out of which blew the favoring wind. He even paused beside me to gossip for a moment about the French restaurants of San Francisco and how, therein, the delectable California fashion of cooking wild duck obtained. "Throw 'em through the fire," he chanted. "That's the way. Throw 'em through the fire. A hot oven, 16 minutes. I take mine 14 to the second, and squeeze the carcasses." By midday the snow had ceased and we were bowling along before a stiff breeze. At 3 in the afternoon we were running before a growing gale. It was across a mad ocean we tore, for the mounting sea that made from eastward bucked into the west end drift and battled and battered down the huge southwesterly swell. And the big grinning dolt of a Finnish carpenter, already food for fish and bird, was astern there, somewhere in the freezing rack and drive. Make westing. We ripped it off across these narrowing degrees of longitude at the southern tip of the planet, where 1 mile counts for 2. And Mr. Pike, staring at his bending topgallant yards, swore that they could carry away for all he cared ere he eased an inch of canvas. More he did. He set the huge crojack, biggest of all sails, and challenged God or Satan to start a seam of it or all its seams. He simply could not go below. In such auspicious occasions all watches were his, and he strove the poop perpetually with all age-lag banished from his legs. Margaret and I were with him in the chart room when he hurrahed the barometer down to 28.55 and falling. And we were near him, on the poop, when he drove by an eastbound lime juicer hove to under upper topsails. We were a biscuit toss away, and he sprang upon the rail at the jigger shrouds, and danced a war dance, and waved his free arm, and yelled his scorn and joy at their discomfiture to the several oil-skinned figures on the stranger vessel's poop. Through the pitch-black night we continued to drive. The crew was sadly frightened, and I sought in vain, in the 2 dog watches, for Tom Spink, to ask him if he thought the carpenter, astern, had opened wide the bag mouth and loosed all his tricks. For the first time I saw the steward apprehensive. "Too much," he told me, with ominous rolling head. "Too much sail. Rotten bad dam all to hell. By, pretty quick, all finish. You see." "They talk about running the easting down," Mr. Pike chortled to me as we clung to the poop rail to keep from fetching away and breaking ribs and necks. "Well, this is running your westing down if anybody should ride up in a go-devil and ask you." It was a wretched, glorious night. Sleep was impossible, for me at any rate, nor was there even the comfort of warmth. Something had gone wrong with the big cabin stove, due to our wild running, I fancy, and the steward was compelled to let the fire go out. So we were getting a taste of the hardship of the forecastle, though in our case everything is dry instead of soggy or afloat. The kerosene stoves burned in our staterooms, but so smelly was mine that I preferred the cold. To sail on one's nerve in an over-canvassed harbour catboat is all the excitement any glutton can desire. But to sail, in the same fashion, in a big ship off the Horn is incredible and terrible. The great west wind drift, setting squarely into the teeth of the easterly gale, kicked up a tideway sea that was monstrous. 2 men toiled at the wheel, relieving in pairs every half hour, and in the face of the cold they streamed with sweat long ere their half-hour shift was up. Mr. Pike is of the elder race of men. His endurance is prodigious. Watch and watch, and all watches, he held the poop. I never dreamed of it, he told me, at midnight, as the great gusts tore by and as we listened for our lighter spars to smash aloft and crash upon the deck. I thought my last whirling sailing was past, and here we are. Here we are. Lord, Lord, I sailed third mate in the little Vampire before you were born. 56 men before the mast, and the last jack of 'em an able seaman. And there were 8 boys, and bosuns that was bosuns, and sailmakers, and carpenters, and stewards, and passengers to jam the decks. And 3 driving mates of us, and Captain Brown, the little wonder. He didn't weigh 100 weight, and he drove us, 3 drivin' mates that learned from him what drivin' was. It was knock down and drag out from the start. The first hour of puttin' men to fair perished our knuckles. I've got the smashed joints yet to show. Every sea chest broke open, every sea bag turned out, and whiskey bottles, knuckle dusters, slingshots, bowie knives, and guns chucked overside by the armful. And when we chose the watches, each man of 56 of 'em laid his knife on the main hatch, and the carpenter broke the point square off. Yes, and the little Vampire only 800 tons. The Elsinore could carry her on her deck. But she was ship, all ship, and them was men's days. Margaret, save for inability to sleep, did not mind the driving, although Mr. Mellaire, on the other hand, admitted apprehension. "He's got my goat," he confided to me. "It isn't right to drive a cargo carrier this way. This isn't a ballasted yacht. It's a coal hulk. I know what driving was, but it was in ships made to drive. Our iron work aloft won't stand it. Mr. Pathurst, I tell you frankly that it is criminal, it is sheer murder, to run the Elsinore with that crojack on her. You can see yourself, sir. It's an after sail. All its tendency is to throw her stern off and her bow up to it. And if it ever happens, sir, if she ever gets away from the wheel for 2 seconds and broaches to—" "Then what?" I asked, or rather shouted, for all conversation had to be shouted close to ear in that blast of gale. He shrugged his shoulders, and all of him was eloquent with the unuttered, unmistakable word, "Finish." At 8 this morning Margaret and I struggled up to the poop, and there was that indomitable, iron old man. He had never left the deck all night. His eyes were bright, and he appeared in the pink of well-being. He rubbed his hands and chuckled greetings to us and took up his reminiscences. In '51, on this same stretch, Miss West, the Flying Cloud, in 24 hours, logged 374 miles under her topgallant sails. That was sailing. She broke the record that day for sail and steam. "And what are we averaging, Mr. Pike?" Margaret queried, while her eyes were fixed on the main deck, where continually one rail and then the other dipped under the ocean and filled across from rail to rail, only to spill out and take in on the next roll. 13 for a fair average since 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon," he exulted. "In the squalls she makes all of 16, which is going some for the Elsinore." "I'd take the crojack off if I had charge," Margaret criticized. "So would I, Miss West," he replied, "if we hadn't been 6 weeks already off the Horn." She ran her eyes aloft, spar by spar, past the spars of hollow steel to the wooden royals, which bent in the gusts like bows in some invisible archer's hands. "They're remarkably good sticks of timber," was her comment. "Well may you say it, Miss West," he agreed. "I'd never have believed they'd have stood it myself. But just look at 'em. Just look at 'em." There was no breakfast for the men. 3 times the galley had been washed out, and the men in the forecastle awash contented themselves with hardtack and cold salt horse. Aft with us, the steward scalded himself twice ere he succeeded in making coffee over a kerosene burner. At noon we picked up a ship ahead, a lime juicer, travelling in the same direction, under lower topsails and one upper topsail. The only one of her courses set was the foresail. "The way that skipper's carrying on is shocking," Mr. Pike sneered. "He should be more cautious and remember God, the owners, the underwriters, and the Board of Trade." Such was our speed that in almost no time we were up with the stranger vessel and passing her. Mr. Pike was like a boy just loosed from school. He altered the course so that we passed her 100 yards away. She was a gallant sight, but, such was our speed, she appeared standing still. Mr. Pike jumped upon the rail and insulted those on her poop by extending a rope's end in invitation to take a tow. Margaret shook her head privily to me as she gazed at our bending royal yards, but was caught in the act by Mr. Pike, who cried out, "What kites she won't carry she can drag." An hour later I caught Tom Spink, just relieved from his shift at the wheel and weak from exhaustion. "What do you think now of the carpenter and his bag of tricks?" I queried. "Lord lumme, it should have been the mate, sir," was his reply. By 5 in the afternoon we had logged 314 miles since 5 the previous day, which was 2 over an average of 13 knots for 24 consecutive hours. "Now take Captain Brown of the little Vampire," Mr. Pike grinned to me, for our sailing made him good-natured. He would never take in until the kites and stunsails was about his ears. And when she was blowing her worst and we was half fairly shortened down, he'd turn in for a snooze and say to us, "Call me if she moderates." Yes, and I'll never forget the night when I called him and told him that everything on top the houses had gone adrift and that 2 of the boats had been swept aft and was kindling wood against the break of the cabin. "Very well, Mr. Pike," he says, batting his eyes and turning over to go to sleep again. "Very well, Mr. Pike," says he, "watch her." And Mr. Pike, "Yes, sir," says I. "Give me a call, Mr. Pike, when the windlass shows signs of coming aft." That's what he said, his very words, and the next moment, damn me, he was snoring. It is now midnight, and, cunningly wedged into my bunk, unable to sleep, I am writing these lines with flying dabs of pencil at my pad. And no more shall I write, I swear, till this gale is blown out, or we are blown to kingdom come. End of chapter 40.